had a lot more planned for this than normal. But after I got to looking at all of it and studying it, I thought, there's no way I'm going to get through all that. Not unless you want to be here till past noon. So I cut it down. I was going to start with hate, and then go to the avenger, and then go to enemy, and then fear, and end with love. Well, I marked hate and the avenger out, because hate was one of them that I had preached on before. So I thought it'd be best if I kind of shortened that up a little bit. When you go to study one of these things, you have no idea what you're getting into until you start studying. On fear alone, there's probably 10 to 15 pages. Quotes the Bible and what it means and so forth and so on, and you can't get that all in, not in one message. Now somebody that's a better person than I am might, but I can't. So we'll start out with enemy. And it's not a very long thing. And I've got so much stuff marked in these books. And then I can't find half of it. Let's see. Right there it is. I apologize. And that was the song, the last song you sang was the one I meant to get. But there is, Does Jesus Care? And then Jesus Cares. Well, I chose Jesus Cares, and that was the wrong one. So I apologize for that, especially to Tom. I think I caused him some aggravation. Okay, we'll start out with enemy. It said an adversary, foe, or hater. An enemy is one who dislikes or hates another and seeks to harm the person. It can refer to an individual, opponent, or to a hostile force, either a nation or an army. The natural inclination of all people is to hate their enemies. Some have even misconstrued God's law to teach hate. Jesus taught rather to love one's enemies and to seek their good. It says this is also the teaching in the Old Testament. Now, I wasn't aware of that, and I've read it, but I wasn't aware of that. We'll go to Proverbs here, 24. And it is in Proverbs 17:18. And really there's more than one verse. It says, do not gloat when your enemy falls. When he stumbles, do not let your heart rejoice, or the Lord will see and disapprove and turn his wrath away from him. In other words, we're not supposed to, if somebody that we don't like or somebody that is an enemy has a problem, we shouldn't gloat over that. Now, I know that's easier said than done. This morning at breakfast, I messed up in my speech, and Karen didn't let me forget it. And so I told her I'd get even with her. Let's see, Proverbs 25, 21, and 22. It says, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. In other words, you're supposed to do good to your enemies. And that's what Jesus taught, and it's also what the Old Testament teaches. And that's not the only place, but that's the one I looked up. It says, in the Bible, a person who destroys, in the Bible, a person who disobeys divine commands is declared to be God's enemy. Paul referred to sinners as the enemies of God. Job felt that God had become his enemy. And that's in Job 13:24. And because of this severed relationship in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, Now, wait a minute, I didn't read all that. Because of this severed relationship, God has made provisions for our forgiveness in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And, and then we jump down here to the enemy of death. It says the greatest and final enemy is death itself. It is feared by all because of its finality and unknown nature, but the Bible teaches that Jesus has abolished death once for all. Death need not be feared by those who have trusted Christ for the salvation he freely gives. Now, as we made that statement there, we'll jump over to fear. And how many of you has ever been scared? I could tell you some stories about me being scared that'll curl your hair. I went to a neighbor's house one night and watched a Frankenstein movie with a buddy. I was about 13 years old. I had to walk about 2 blocks to get back home. You talk about scared. If somebody had jumped out and yelled real loud, I'd have dropped dead on the spot. Because I was scared when I was walking home. Another time I watched a movie in Greencastle called The Brain Eaters. Now, I'm sure all of you have probably heard of that. But they had a woman in that movie that screamed about every 10 seconds. When I walked out of that movie, I couldn't even see straight. I said, I don't watch horror movies no more. I just don't. I just won't watch them. I know some people enjoy them, but I'll be truthful with you. They put evil thoughts in my mind. Okay, let's go to fear. It says, fear, a broad range of emotions that embraces both the secular and the religious world. Secular fear is a natural feeling of alarm caused by the expectation of imminent danger, pain, or disaster. Religious fear appears as a result of awe and reverence toward the supreme power. The English word fear is used to translate several Hebrew and Greek words in the Old Testament. The most common word used is expressed fear is Y-R-I-A-H. Yarai is the only way I know to say that, and I'm probably saying it wrong, which means fear, terror. In the New Testament, the word used most often to express fear is phobos, which means fear, dread, and terror. And now we'll get down here into some other, I'm getting ahead of myself. It says, where am I? I lost my place. So, okay, here we go. Animals fear humans, and humans fear animals. Now that's in Amos. It says individuals fear individuals, and nations fear nations. People are afraid of wars, of their enemy, of subjugating. People are afraid of death, of sudden panic, of being overtaken by adversaries, and of unknown. Fear can reflect the limitations of life, as well as the unforeseen consequences of action. Fear can be the regal the young owes to the aged. The honor of child demonstrates toward parents, the reverence, respect of individuals toward their master, and to persons in positions of responsibility. Fear also can be the sense of concern for individuals as well as the respect for one's husband. Now, I don't know why they put that in there, because it seems to me like it ought to have been both ways, but it just says a fear of one's husband. Now, fear of consequences of sin, fear may come from a strong realization of sin and disobedience. Men and women were afraid after their acts of disobedience. Abimelech was afraid when he realized that he had committed an offensive act by taking the wife of Abraham to be his wife. And really, that wasn't even that man's fault, but God told him it was his fault. He said, you've taken another man's wife. It was Abraham's fault because he lied and said that he was his sister. And really, that wasn't really a lie because she was his half-sister. So, lies can catch up with you, and they do at times. Just like I told Blake that I had never told a lie, and that caught up with me. Okay. It says, this sense of estrangement and guilt that comes as consequences of sin produced in the heart of individuals the fear of the day of the Lord, because they will appear before the judgment of God. Freedom from fear. Freedom from fear comes as individuals trust in God, who protects and helps them. The New Testament teaches that perfect love casts out all fear. Christians are no longer slaves of fear, for Christ has given them not a spirit of intimidation or cowardice, but a spirit of power, of love, and self-control. Religious fear is a human response to the presence of God. Now, I got to read you a little something here in the Bible on this one. We have to go all the way back to Exodus. And this one is a good one. Matter of fact, we studied a little bit on this morning in the Sunday school lesson. Now, God had given the 10 Commandments. And he told the people to come, we was talking about this. He told the people all to come up to the mountain, Mount Sinai. All of them had to go up, not just the 70, but all of them. And God was going to speak to all of them. He said, anybody that stepped on the mountain would die. Any animal that strayed on the mountain had to be destroyed. All right. It says, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the tempest and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Now that's pretty fearful. He had really scared them good there. And it says, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Now, I know you've probably all read that passage, but I would think that would be the ultimate fear right there. Moses, when he went to the burning bush, he approached that in fear because he didn't know what was going on. And whenever God told him to come forward, Moses fell on his face because he'd been told that anybody that looks on God will die. Now you see, I don't know, all of you wasn't here for the Sunday school lesson, but the Sunday school lesson today said the 70 and Aaron and his 2 sons and Moses seen God. Well, that's a contradiction to where it says that nobody sees God and lives. But there's an answer to that. They think that maybe it may have been a incarnate Jesus that they seen instead of God. Jesus was here when God made the earth. A lot of people don't realize that. He was here. He said, I've always been and always will be. And so was God. And he says, if you've seen me, you've seen my Father. I and my Father is one. So I can understand the fear of God. I really can. I think everybody here can. It's more of an awe than it is a fear. Of course, I don't know if I was to see God. Some of the things they describe in the Bible, the cherubims and what's the other one? There's another one besides Seraphim. Yeah, okay. Seraphim. And they describe them. I think that would be awful fearful to look at if one was to jump up in front of you or come up behind you. That would be a very fearful thing. And I know there's a lot of people that I've heard people say, well, I don't have any fear. We all have fears, and it's not necessarily the fear of self-destruction. I have fears that Excuse me, I'm getting emotional. With Karen. She has a lot of problems. And it always scares me when she does. She's not here today because of one of them. And we fear for our families. That's normal. It's natural. And all of us do it. Has anybody ever lost a kid in a department store? There is no greater fear. I had a grandson that used to run away all the time, and we lost him in one of the Walmart stores in Indianapolis. Boy, when I found that little booger, I busted his behind. I was that scared because I don't, a little kid in a big store gets lost, and you see all of these things about these human traffickers. There's where I think the Avengers should come in. I have no sympathy for those people that traffic in children. I don't. I have no sympathy for them at all. And I know that I'm probably wrong in saying that because God said you're supposed to love everybody. But I find it awful difficult to love someone that does that kind of evil. Okay, I've got over my... Okay, it says, God as a fearful God, the God of Israel, is an awe-producing God because of his majesty, his power, his works, his tendencies, and his holiness. Yahweh is a great and terrible God. He is fearful in praise, doing wonders. His name is fearful. And that was in Deuteronomy, it says. The fear of God comes as people experience God in a visible manifestation, in dreams, in visible form, and in his work of salvation. God's work, his power, majesty, holiness invoke fear and demand acknowledgement. The fear of God is not to be understood as a dread that comes out of fear of punishment, but as a reverential regard and awe that comes out of recognition and submission to the divine. It is a revelation of God's will to which the believer submits in obedience. Says the basis of God's relationship with Israel was the covenants. The personal relationship that comes out of the covenant transforms the relationship from a sense of terror to one of respect and reverence, in which trust predominates. This fear which produces awe can be seen in the worship of Israel. The Israelites were exhorted to serve the Lord with fear. Fear protected Israel from taking God for granted or from presuming on his grace. Fear as obedience. It says, sets out a relationship between the fear of God and the observance of demands of the covenant. To fear the Lord is one of the ways by which Israel expresses its obedience and loyalty to Yahweh and his divine requirements. It says, when fear is used in a religious context, it's used 60 times in the words invitation to trust God. These words appear in the context of fear and terror that follows divine revelation. Now there's one more over here that I wanted. I hope I didn't miss it. Anyway, it is fear not. How many times have we read that in the Bible? Mary heard it. John the Baptist's father, I can't remember his name. There's a bunch of them that heard fear not from an angel of the Lord. Abraham heard it, and so forth. It says these words are an invitation to trust God. They appear in the context of fear and terror that follows divine revelations. Now this was used over 60 times in the Bible with fear. I see there's another one over here. It says, Paul admonishes believers to work out their salvation with fear and trembling. The early church grew in number as they lived in the fear of the Lord. The fear of God is related to the love of God. I like that. It said the revelation of God's people in the New Testament contains the elements of God's mysterious otherness, calling for reverent obedience. Now that's a word I haven't, otherness. I haven't seen that too often. The New Testament church stands in awe and fear in the presence of the Holy God, for fear is the whole duty of man. Okay, now we're going to go to somewhere else. And this is called love. Now, I could go on and on in here with love. It even jumps over to love, brotherly love, love fest, loving kindness. I mean, it just goes on and on. But for the sake of time, I thought I would keep it a little bit short. It says unselfish. This is love. It's unselfish, loyal, benevolent, concern for the well-being of others. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul describes love as a more excellent way than tongues or even preaching. The New Testament maintains this estimate of love throughout. The King James Version uses the word charity. You all heard the word faith, hope, and charity. Well, charity stands for love. I think it was Dale Evans that wrote a song called Faith, Hope, and Charity. That's the way to live successfully. How do I know? The Bible tells me so. And surely you guys remember that song. Okay. It says the King James Version, instead of love, charity instead of love, to translate the Greek word Paul used is agape. I said the word charity comes from the Latin charitas, which means dearness, affection, or high regard. Today, the word charity is normally used for acts of benevolence, and so the word love is to be preferred as a translation of agape. Nevertheless, the reader who comes to the agape of the New Testament with the idea of benevolence in mind is better off than the reader who comes with the idea of physical pleasure and satisfaction. Karen, that is a love or a word that Karen really likes. I'll tell you what she named our dog. We just got a new dog. And she named this dog Sky Agape. Now, I don't use that. I use Sky or Noodle Brain at times. But that's the name she chose for our dog. Agape love. Karen run a home nursing thing for a while. She was a, what was she? QMA, qualified medical attendant. She worked at the Waters, which at that time it wasn't the Waters, it was something else. But she worked there. And after she quit, well, she went into this thing and she called it, when she put it on, advertised it, she called it the Agape Love, something or the other. I can't remember now what it was. But she, her and Julie, my youngest daughter, both worked this way, helping elderly people in their homes. And it ain't as great as you think. They both fell in love with them older people. And then when something happened to them, they was really tore up. And Julie quit it, and she wouldn't do it anymore because of that very reason. That old lady she took care of for several years, she passed away, and it really upset her badly. And of course it did Karen too. But anyway, that's what agape means. It says the English verb, it describes physical love between the sexes, even sexual desires. It describes love within a family and among friends. Love as self-giving appears in the significant commandments that Israel love the stranger. Now, if you go back to the Bible in the Old Testament, Israel was pretty smug, wouldn't they? They didn't like the Samaritans. And there's a lot of people they didn't like because they weren't Israelites. And that's not what God taught them. All through the Old Testament, strangers, the aliens, you were supposed to treat them the same way you did your brothers. And so, it says the basis for such selfless love is God's act of redemption. Let's see, I hope I read that right. The basis for such selfless love is God's act of redemption. Says Jesus, in Jesus' teachings in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Shema of Deuteronomy, the command to love God is united with Leviticus. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And just for the parable of the Good Samaritan, a lawyer quoted the two commands to love and then asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Of course, you all know that story. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. It said the Good Samaritan took care of the man who fell among robbers to illustrate a selfless love which is to be characteristic of citizens of the kingdom. In Matthew 5:43 and 48, Jesus gave the radical command to love one's enemies and to pray for the ones who persecute. Loving only those who love you is, according to Jesus, no better than those who are not his disciples. The love that Jesus' disciples have for others is to be just as complete in God's love. Compare Romans 5:8. In these teachings, of course, the selfless love is a response to God's prior activities. It is a way of living expected of those who are citizens of the kingdom. And that covers all of us. So we're supposed to love even our enemies. And now, if you go back to the giving of the law, and I think it's, I don't know which book, it may be Leviticus. It says an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, an arm for an arm, and a foot for a foot. Well, Jesus changed that. He said that's not the way it's supposed to be. But it does say that in the Old Testament. All right, now let me go on here. I keep losing my place. Yeah, the teachings of Jesus on love enemies, it will be noted, are a part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is directed to Christian discipline. The teachings of Paul in the poem of on love in the Corinthians 13, Paul associates love with the all-important biblical word of faith and hope and agape, or love. Important biblical words of faith and hope. But it says and declares love the greatest. In other words, you can go out and show kindness and so forth, but if you do it out of self-pride, I can't think of a better word, there probably is a better word, or because of you think that's what, if your only excuse for doing it is because God told you to, you gain nothing if you don't have love. Without love, you have nothing at all. I think there's a song that even says that. That was one of them I was trying to look up earlier. And it says, Thessalonians 5:8, Galatians 5:6, and declared love the greatest. The context for this poem on love is Paul's discussion of relationships within the church. 1 Corinthians indicates that the gift of the Spirit ecstatic speech, wisdom, faith, and self-sacrifice are good for nothing without love. Only love builds up. The Spirit disturbs his gift for the command good. No, I've got that wrong. I got to redo that. The Spirit distributes his gift for the command good. 1 Corinthians 13:4-7 characterizes love. Love is patient, kind, not jealous or boastful, not arrogant or rude. Love is not selfish, irritable, or resentful. Love does not rejoice at wrong, but in the right. Love bears believers' hope and endures all things. Now that's a tall order. It really is a tall order, because we all have bad feelings about people. Say somebody got to give you a snide remark or something, and the first thing you think of, well, how can I come back with something better than that? And I've done it. I'm guilty. Now we go down to the John writings. It says, the John Annian writing magnify the significance of love as forcefully and fully as any other writing. John writing accounts for 1/10 of the New Testament, but provides 1/3 of the reference to love. The key text in the first half of the Gospel of John is John 3:16. Now, who in here does not know that? John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Okay, the key text, the passage indicates the relationship of the Father's love to the work of Christ and of both to the life of believers. These themes are repeated throughout the Gospel of John. The second half of the Gospel of John, now there's a good one over here where I end. I'm not running over badly, am I?
A little bit.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
It says, emphasis the ethical dimension of love among Christians. The key passage is Jesus' new commandment in John 3:34-35. Also see John, and it names a whole bunch of them. This command to Jesus to love one another gives us insight into the nature of Jesus Christ for the church and the nature of Christian love. What is commanded is not an emotion. It is a discipline, will to seek the welfare of others. Jesus speaks with the authority of the Father, the only one with authority to make such demands of men and women. Jesus speaks as the incarnate Word. He has authority to give conditions for discipleship. The relationship of his commandments to Leviticus should be noted. Both command love, but Jesus' command included the clause, as I have loved you. Now that was it. Now it says he has authority to give conditions for discipleship. Now if you remember the first one I said, Jesus said in order for you to follow me, you have to hate your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your children, your wife. And there's one lady sitting up front here, and she gave me the dirtiest look. She thought I was full of baloney. It does say that. It says it in Luke. But if you read what hate stands for in here, this is what led to all of this. He wasn't telling you had to hate your father. To me, hate is a strong word. You know it is. They explained it as he meant love less. In other words, he wants all your love. And you're supposed to love those people less. Because I don't think there's anybody in here that hates their father and their mother and their wife and their children or whatever. I was just telling you a while ago about how scared you get if one of your kids or grandchild or somebody gets lost in a big department store. And That's all I have right now. I will say a blessing. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you and humble ourselves before you to ask you to let us understand this the way you wanted us to understand it. And not the way I meant it, but the way you wanted us to understand it. Open our hearts and minds to hear your word and to understand what you mean. I know there's a lot of different theories out there and so forth, and some of them disturb me, and some of them I agree with. I hope that I didn't offend anyone here, and I hope that you was with us and helped us to understand what you want us to understand. We ask you to be with all of us now. Keep your protective hand over us. Take us home safe. We ask this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. That's all I got. And I got to have notes and markers. I told Karen we need to get one of those rigs that you pass over writing and it'll put it on a paper and kick it out of your copy. That's what I need. Thank you very much.
Tom, you got a closing hymn for us?
One verse, 426.
426.
Want to stand, please? Ye